At 8:07 a.m., 3 tons of jagged gravel crashed onto our driveway with the subtlety of a meteor strike, burying the tires of my wife Ellen's sedan and shattering the quiet of our suburban street in Maplewood, Ohio. The truck driver didn't bother to step out, just honked twice, tossed a cigarette butt into our azaleas, and peeled away, leaving a dusty mountain between us and the rest of the world. From the front porch, my father-in-law, Henry Brooks, lowered his binoculars, growled, "Well, I'll be damned," and reached for his aluminum baseball bat, the one with electrical tape wrapped around the grip. That's when I knew we were in for a fight. Maplewood was the kind of place where lawns were manicured to military precision and mailboxes stood like sentinels in uniform colors. For 20 years, Ellen and I had lived here, raising our daughter Sarah, and, more recently, helping with our teenage granddaughter Lily. Henry, a retired Navy engineer who'd seen action in Vietnam, had been with us since Ellen's mother passed. He was 73, sharp as a tack, and had a temper that could make a thunderstorm look timid. He'd lived in Maplewood since the 1980s, long before the Homeowners Association turned into a bureaucratic beast under Margaret Hensley, its president and self-styled queen of curb appeal. 2 weeks earlier, Margaret had zeroed in on our front yard. Her issue? A plastic pink flamingo named Penelope and a garden gnome giving the middle finger, both of Henry's prized possessions. She'd slapped us with a $300 fine, sent 3 snarky emails, and delivered 2 notes tucked into sugar-free cookies that tasted like cardboard. Henry ate them anyway, claiming they tasted like HOA oppression. He wasn't wrong. Margaret's reign was a masterclass in petty tyranny, fining people for untrimmed hedges, banning unapproved mailbox decals, and once citing a neighbor for excessive wind chime noise. Henry, who'd once dodged a zoning board meeting by faking a fishing trip, had no patience for her nonsense. That morning, as the gravel blocked our driveway, Ellen stood in her bathrobe, clutching a mug of chamomile tea gone cold. "This has to be a mistake," she murmured, her eyes darting to the pile. They wouldn't just. Her voice trailed off as Margaret sauntered down the sidewalk, clipboard in hand, wearing yoga pants and a smile that could curdle milk. "Good morning," she chirped. "Just a little landscaping upgrade. Check your HOA covenant, Section 12C. Henry didn't respond. He marched inside, vanished into the garage, and didn't emerge for hours. When he did, he was a sight. An old Navy cap perched on his head, a makeshift bandolier of garden hose loops slung across his chest, dragging a lawn chair like it was battle gear. He planted the chair at the edge of the driveway, climbed atop it, and stared at the gravel like it had spat on his mother's grave. He stayed there all day, silent, unyielding. By dusk, the gravel had done its job. No one could move our cars. Lily missed her volunteer shift at the animal shelter and spent the day Googling legal ways to mess with an HOA. Henry just sat, plodding. Around 9 p.m., he turned to us and said, "We're not moving this gravel." "They are." When Lily asked who they were, he grinned. "The oppressors. The gravel Nazis. Margaret and her minions." The next morning, he was up at dawn, sketching on graph paper with a pencil in his teeth. Lily hovered, asking if she could live-stream the chaos. He ignored her, muttering about supply lines and tactical advantage. By 7 a.m., I was at the hardware store, buying 10 bags of powdered dye, 2 PVC pipes, and enough duct tape to alarm a cashier. She didn't blink. While I played errand boy, Margaret escalated her campaign. She went door to door with flyers titled Maplewood's Modernization Plan, claiming our gravel was part of a community enhancement pilot. On the neighborhood Facebook group, she posted that the Brooks family was proudly participating. When someone commented they buried their car, Margaret, she deleted it instantly. She had a knack for rewriting reality, like a politician caught in a scandal blaming the weather. By week's end, Henry had built what he called the Freedom Wagon, a wheelbarrow rigged with a leaf blower, reinforced handles, and a GoPro. He tested it in the backyard, launching dyed gravel into a kiddie pool. Lily filmed it in slow motion, added a Hans Zimmer score, and posted it on TikTok. It racked up 40,000 views in a day. Henry became the gravel guy, a viral sensation. But he wasn't chasing fame. He was planning a strike. "We hit them at the HOA meeting," he said, eyes gleaming. "Cars parked, no witnesses, full impact." Lily whispered, "Are we reverse graveling them?" Henry nodded. "Dump for a dump." I should have stopped him. He was 73, with a replaced hip and a few shorter than a firecracker. But part of me, a bigger part than I'd admit, wanted to see Margaret's smug grin buried under a pile of her own medicine. We weren't alone. Maplewood had been suffocating under HOA rules for years. Neighbors lived in fear of fines for minor infractions, like leaving a bike out overnight or planting unapproved tulips. Henry's defiance was a spark, and the kindling was already dry. Our next-door neighbor, Carl, a conspiracy nut who thought the moon landing was staged, offered his garage as a staging ground. Mrs. Dolores, a former HOA treasurer ousted after accusing Margaret of skimming funds, brought blueprints of the community center. And Mike, a tow truck driver who owed Henry a favor from a poker game in '06, lent his rig for what Henry dubbed Operation Backlash. It was like watching a geriatric heist movie unfold, with Lily designing logos and Henry assigning code names. He was ironclad, Lily was Cyber Swan, and I was Reluctant Mule. We held strategy sessions in our basement, complete with a whiteboard and a playlist of patriotic rock anthems. Henry was alive in a way I hadn't seen in years, not just grumbling about cable news or squirrels, but vibrant, driven. All it took was a pile of rocks and a petty dictator named Margaret. The night before the strike, Lily caught Margaret walking her corgi near our driveway. From the window, she recorded Margaret laughing at her dog. Let's see how long the old coot holds out. Lily played the clip for Henry. He didn't speak, just nodded, and went back to polishing the Freedom Wagon's wheels. The next morning, Maplewood would never be the same. The night before Operation Backlash, Henry didn't sleep. He sat at the kitchen table, a flashlight clenched in his mouth, scribbling diagrams on a napkin with phrases like flanking pattern and optimal scatter radius. Lily brewed him coffee, which he refused, claiming it made his hands too twitchy for precision. Instead, he sipped warm prune juice, insisting it kept his mind like a steel trap. Ellen and I exchanged glances, half expecting him to start quoting Sun Tzu. The plan had ballooned from a prank into a neighborhood uprising, and Henry was its grizzled general. At 6 a.m., we gathered in the garage, now a makeshift command center. Henry had hung a bedsheet on the wall, where Lily projected a Google Earth map of Maplewood. Red XS marked the homes of the HOA board members. Blue circles flagged security cameras. Tiny gravel pieces were glued to index cards labeled payload. Around a folding table littered with granola bars and duct tape, our ragtag crew took their seats. Henry tapped a yardstick against the sheet like he was briefing a SWAT team. Today, we remind them what they did, he said, his voice gravelly. Not just to us, but to this whole damn street. Carl, our conspiracy-obsessed neighbor, raised a hand. What about drones? Saw one last night by the Petersons' mailbox. Could be HOA spies. Henry squinted. Lily, typing furiously on her laptop, said, I've got it. Built a signal jammer from an old router and Grandpa's hearing aid battery. 10-minute range, max. Henry beamed. That's my girl. Our team was a motley crew. Carl, in socks and sandals, clutching a taser he called Betsy Mrs. Dolores, fueled by a decades-old grudge against Margaret, and Mike, the tow truck guy, reeking of diesel and chewing a burrito. Truck's ready, Mike said, wiping his chin. Tarped, loaded, back door open. We split into 2 units. Team Payload, led by Henry and Lily, would haul the gravel in Mike's truck and dump it on the board members' cars during the HOA's emergency meeting. Team Diversion, Carl and Mrs. Dolores, would keep Margaret distracted. I was logistics, which meant handing out gloves, checking routes, and pretending I wasn't terrified we'd end up on the evening news. Deep down, I knew this could either free Maplewood or land us in handcuffs. At 7:30 a.m., the convoy rolled out. Mike's truck crept along, its tarp rattling with gravel. Lily sat shotgun, walkie-talkie in hand, a Bluetooth speaker blaring Sweet Home Alabama for morale. Henry followed in his golf cart, now decked out with camouflage netting, a leaf blower, and a Don't Tread on Me flag flapping proudly. I trailed in my hatchback, scanning for cops or nosy ring cameras. The HOA meeting was set for 8 a.m. at the Community Rec Center, called by Margaret to address an outbreak of resident defiance. It was a power play meant to scare everyone into submission. As residents filed into the rec center, Margaret stood at the podium in a mint green blazer, radiating smug authority. We're under attack, she declared. Certain individuals think they're above our rules. Without the HOA, Maplewood would be chaos. Meanwhile, Carl was in the hallway, setting off fire alarms with a lighter and a piece of burnt toast. Mrs. Dolores wheeled in a coffee cart that spewed more steam than espresso, shouting compliments of Margaret. She wants you to be alert to vote her out. The room descended into confusion. Outside, Henry and Lily struck. The gravel was divided into 6 buckets, each labeled for a board member's car based on tire size and general arrogance. Margaret's Cadillac got a double dose. They moved like a SEAL team, Lily on lookout, Henry shoveling with ferocious precision. The first car, a silver Audi owned by board member Greg from Oak Lane, was buried in under a minute, gravel spilling over the windshield like a landslide. Lily filmed it, later adding slow-motion effects and calling it Freedom's first strike. The next 2 cars fell just as fast. Neighbors peeked from windows, some cheering silently. One elderly woman saluted. Then came Margaret's Cadillac, license plate, Ho Queen. Henry approached it like a priest at a ritual, bucket in hand. He didn't dump it all at once. First, he sprinkled gravel across the roof, then the hood, savoring the moment. Finally, he appended the bucket onto the windshield, tapped the hood twice, and muttered, "Justice served." That's when the alarm blared, not from the cars, but from Margaret. She'd cut her speech short, noticed the empty lot, and sprinted outside, heels clicking like machine gun fire. "Who did this?" she shrieked, gravel crunching underfoot. "Who?" Henry was already in his golf cart, making a leisurely escape down Elm Street like a gray-haired outlaw. Lily tossed a smoke bomb for effect, but it fizzled, coughing out a pathetic puff of mist. Still, it was enough. Margaret stood in the lot, gravel clinging to her blazer, screaming into her phone as neighbors filmed. No one helped her. The tide had shifted. Back home, Henry parked the cart, stretched his back, and said, "Went better than planned." I handed him a water bottle. "Think they'll hit back?" He smirked. "Oh, they'll try. And we'll be ready." He pulled out a fresh napkin, already scribbled with notes. Lily peeked over his shoulder and whispered, "Phase 2. Henry nodded. The fallout was immediate. By noon, videos of Margaret's meltdown were trending on X with hashtags like Gravelgate and HOA Revolt. Lily edited the footage into a TikTok epic, complete with dramatic zooms on Margaret's furious face. It hit 120,000 views in hours. Henry called it his cyber artillery. We celebrated in the garage, where Mike brought donuts, Mrs. Dolores shared empanadas, and Carl, wild-eyed, read X posts about the Gravelites, a neighbor group forming on Pine Road. For a moment, we were heroes, not just victims of Margaret's rule. But Henry wasn't naive. "This was a jab," he said, tapping a chalkboard labeled HOA counterstrikes. "They'll swing harder." He was right. Within 24 hours, Margaret unleashed hell. Our mailbox was cited for insufficient color vibrancy. Our lawn gnome was deemed excessively provocative. Our trash cans got a violation for being visibly askew. The kicker? A notice claiming weed violated gravel integration standards. She was weaponizing red tape, and she was good at it. Worse, Margaret deployed 2 HOA drones, buzzing over Maplewood like robotic vultures. Henry dubbed them sky fascists and declared war. Lily rigged a jammer from a microwave part, and one drone crashed into a rosebush. We buried it behind the shed. The other drone kept its distance, wary. Then came the real blow, a lawsuit. Margaret filed against us for property vandalism, emotional distress, and malicious landscaping. It was absurd but legally binding, backed by her lawyer, Leonard, a bow-tie-wearing pit bull who lived for HOA loopholes. Henry took the lawsuit papers, his knuckles whitening around the edges. Lily asked if he was okay. "Didn't think she'd go this far," he muttered. Then he stood, pulled a dusty box from the garage shelf, and unwrapped a faded HOA charter from 1985, his signature at the bottom. He hadn't just lived here, he'd helped found Maplewood. That night, we held a grim strategy session. "We need leverage," Henry said. "Proof she's crooked." Mrs. Dolores grinned. "She's been fudging budgets for years, fake benches, ghost lighting." I kept every receipt. The fight was far from over. The lawsuit hit us like a sucker punch, but Henry Brooks wasn't the type to flinch. In our kitchen, under the hum of a flickering fluorescent light, we huddled for an emergency strategy session. The air was thick with tension, not the giddy adrenaline of our gravel strike, but a heavier, survival-driven focus. Ellen looked pale, her fingers tracing the rim of her tea mug. Lily stared at the wall, her usual spark dimmed. Henry, though, was a rock. "She's gone nuclear," he whispered, eyes on the lawsuit papers. Then, with a spark in his gaze, he added, "Time to take this to the people." Margaret Hensley's latest move was a masterstroke of cruelty. She dug up a supposed zoning violation from the 1990s, claiming our house, Henry's home for decades, wasn't compliant with Maplewood's original charter. If she pushed it through the HOA board, She could force us to vacate or drag us into court. Eviction by paperwork. It was the kind of move that could break a family, and she knew it. But Henry saw her escalation for what it was, desperation. She's scared, he said. She's losing control, and she knows it. Our new plan wasn't about wheelbarrows or smoke bombs. It was about exposure, community, and playing by the rules Margaret herself had written. Mrs. Dolores, our ally and former HOA treasurer, was key. Margaret's been cooking the books, she said, her voice sharp with years of pent-up resentment. Thousands in community upgrades benches, tree lights, a fountain that never existed. I've got the receipts to prove it. Lily, ever the tech wizard, volunteered to digitize the evidence. Carl, still convinced the HOA was a front for government mind control, offered to build a truth board in his basement, complete with yarn and pushpins. Henry took a different approach. He started knocking on doors, not to rant or recruit, but to listen. Armed with a worn copy of the 1985 HOA charter and Lily's viral video about his flagpole, he asked neighbors one simple question. Is this the Maplewood you signed up for? He didn't push. He told stories about the neighborhood's early days, when the HOA was about potlucks and helping widows with yard work, not fines and drones. To our surprise, people opened their doors. They offered coffee, shared their own HOA horror stories, and admitted they'd been too scared to speak up. Henry permitted them to hope. Meanwhile, Margaret tightened her grip. She doubled fines across Maplewood, banned decorative flags, and shut down the community garden for behavioral review. At a special board meeting, she proposed license plate scanners at every entrance, claiming it was for safety. It was surveillance, plain and simple, but she sold it with a smile, and some residents bought it. She was baiting Henry, hoping he'd lash out again so she could bury us in more violations. But Henry stayed calm, unnervingly so. Instead of gravel, he planted succulents in our front yard, arranged in a perfect peace sign. Confuse her, he said, wiping dirt off his hands. Nothing scares a control freak more than you outsmarting them at their own game. Margaret's next attack was personal. She targeted Henry's flagpole, a 10-foot tribute to his Navy service that had stood for 15 years. A notice arrived, claiming it violated height and placement standards. Henry didn't react at first. He just stood by the pole, hand resting on the metal, staring at the flag as if it held his heartbeat. Later, he pulled a wooden box from his closet, revealing a folded American flag and a faded photo of his Vietnam unit. Lily sat with him, silent, until he said, "She's not just after our house. She's after our history." That night, Lily made a video, not a meme, but a gut punch. It showed Henry tending the flagpole, interspersed with photos from his service and a voiceover about what it meant to him. She ended with, "This isn't about gravel anymore. It's about who decides what community means." By morning, it had gone viral. Local news stations called. A veterans group arrived with a lawyer and a truckload of flags. Margaret tried to spin it, claiming she respected veterans, but the backlash was fierce. She crossed a line, and Maplewood noticed. Back at home, Lily and Mrs. Dolores were digging through financial records. With Henry's old HOA charter as a guide, they found discrepancies. $5,000 for a playground slide that never materialized. $3,000 for holiday lighting that was just a single string of bulbs. Lily built a website overnight, Maplewood Truth, with scanned receipts, budget comparisons, and even a photo of Margaret fake smiling at a bake sale. The site exploded, shared across X and local news outlets. One headline read, "Gravel Rebellion. A neighborhood fights back." Margaret called it slander, but her denials sounded hollow. The real breakthrough came when Lily stumbled on a city zoning document, dated 3 months before the gravel drop. It wasn't signed by Margaret, but by a junior clerk ordering gravel delivery to our address. It predated any HOA action, meaning Margaret hadn't ordered the gravel, just claimed credit for it. The truth was absurd. A city intern had mistyped our address instead of an empty lot meant for a park. The truck driver just followed orders. Henry stared at the document, then at the gravel pile, and laughed a deep, shoulder-shaking laugh. "Well, hell," he said, wiping his eyes. "The real villain's a typo." The discovery reframed everything. Our war, Margaret's retaliation, the lawsuit, all sparked by a clerical error. But it didn't change the fight. Margaret's corruption was real, and Maplewood was waking up. The website fueled resident groups on X, with hashtags like Maplewood Rising. Neighbors who'd once avoided us now waved, brought cookies, and shared their finds for nonsense like unapproved porch paint. Carl's Gravelites grew, hosting secret meetings in garages. Even quiet types, like Mr. Peterson, a retired accountant, started asking questions at HOA meetings. Margaret fought back, doubling security at the rec center and posting online that anarchist sympathizers would face penalties. But her fear tactics were cracking. Then came the bombshell. Mr. Peterson, a meek board member who'd always voted with Margaret, showed up at our door with a folder. "I didn't know the half of it," he said, voice trembling. "But I've seen enough." Inside were documents proving Margaret had forged resident signatures to pass 3 major HOA motions, including her precious security cameras. It was the smoking gun. Henry stood on the porch that night, watching the sunset over Maplewood. He didn't gloat or cheer, just nodded and said, "Now she's the one sweating." The stage was set for a showdown. We had evidence, allies, and a neighborhood ready to act. But Margaret wasn't done. She'd built her empire on control, and she'd fight to keep it, no matter the cost. The question wasn't just whether we could win, it was whether Maplewood could become the community Henry remembered, or if we'd all be crushed under Margaret's rule. The morning of the emergency HOA meeting felt like the prelude to a high-stakes duel, the kind where the whole town gathers to see who walks away. Maplewood buzzed with attention you could feel in your bones. Cars lined the streets. Neighbors clustered in hushed groups, and the air carried the weight of a reckoning. Henry Brooks stood in our living room, ironing his one good shirt, the kind with a pocket for his pen and a folded list of talking points. He looked like a man who'd walked through fire and come out tougher for it, his eyes steady but burning with purpose. Lily, usually a chatterbox, was quiet, clutching her tablet as she triple-checked the Maplewood Truth files. Ellen and I exchanged nervous glances, knowing this was either the end of Margaret Hensley's reign or the day we'd lose everything. The rec center was packed, standing room only. Residents who'd never bothered with HOA meetings showed up, some curious, others angry. Margaret stood at the podium in a lavender blazer, her smile as tight as a stretched rubber band. Behind her, the board sat in neat rows, some fidgeting, others avoiding eye contact with the crowd. She opened with a sugary welcome, as if this were just another routine meeting, not the climax of a neighborhood uprising. "Thank you all for coming," she said, voice dripping with false warmth. "Let's discuss our shared vision for Maplewood." Henry didn't let her finish. He stood, arms crossed, voice cutting through the room like a blade. "Before we move on, I'd like to raise a motion for board review." The crowd shifted, heads turning. Margaret blinked, caught off guard, but recovered quickly. "Mr. Brooks," she said, her smile thinning, "you're not a board member. Please sit." Henry didn't flinch. "I'm not," he agreed, holding up the 1985 HOA charter. "But per this document, any resident in good standing can submit a motion with 10% of signatures. I've got 43 triple what's needed." Margaret's mouth opened, then closed. She tried to laugh, but it came out like a strangled cough. "And your motion is?" Henry stepped forward, voice ringing. "A vote of no confidence in the HOA president for procedural fraud, financial misconduct, and abuse of power." The room erupted in murmurs, gasps rippling through the crowd. Margaret looked to her board for backup, but no one moved. Then Mr. Peterson, the quiet accountant who'd turned on her, stood. "I second the motion." The first crack in her armor appeared. The HOA bylaws, ironically written by Margaret to cement her control, left no wiggle room. A seconded motion with verified signatures had to proceed. For the next 30 minutes, the rec center became a courtroom. Lily took the stage, projecting Maplewood Truth onto a screen. She zoomed in on forged signatures, mismatched budgets, and receipts for projects that never existed, like $4,000 for a dog park that was just a plastic fire hydrant glued to dirt. Mr. Peterson spoke, admitting he'd raised concerns about Margaret's spending, but was silenced. Neighbors stood, one by one, sharing stories. Fines for unapproved flower pots, ignored roof repairs, a sense that the HOA served Margaret, not Maplewood. Margaret tried to defend herself. "I've worked tirelessly, unpaid, for this community," she said, voice trembling with rehearsed sincerity. But then Henry read aloud a leaked email where she called residents aesthetic burdens and joked about replacing our porch with a wall of begonias. She claimed it was sarcasm. No one bought it. The crowd's mood shifted from restless to resolute, like a jury reaching a verdict. The vote was simple: yes or no on Margaret's removal. Henry and two neutral neighbors supervised the ballots, ensuring transparency. When the count was done, Henry stepped to the podium. 71 votes cast, he said. 59 for removal, 12 against. Silence. Then a clap. Then cheers, not wild or vengeful, but a collective exhale, like Maplewood had been holding its breath for years. Margaret sat, pale and speechless, her empire crumbling. Henry didn't gloat. He just nodded and said, "Thank you. Now let's fix this place." With Margaret ousted, Mrs. Dolores took over as interim president, unanimously chosen by the crowd. She promised open meetings, fair rules, and a full audit of the past 5 years. Lily was tasked with managing digital records, ensuring transparency. Henry declined any role, saying, "I'm done fighting. Time to plant something." The lawsuit collapsed without Margaret's influence, and the city issued a sheepish apology for the gravel mix-up, blaming a clerk named Todd who'd botched 50 addresses. They offered to haul the gravel away, but Henry refused. "It's part of the story now," he said. Days later, we got the final twist. Lily's inquiry to the city confirmed the gravel was a mistake, meant for a lot 2 blocks away. Margaret hadn't ordered it, just seized the opportunity to flex her power. Henry chuckled, staring at the pile. "Some screw-ups are gifts," he said. Margaret moved out a month later, selling her house to a couple who painted their mailbox rainbow colors and installed a duck-shaped koi pond. Henry sent them a pie. Maplewood began to heal. Lawns grew a bit wilder, mailboxes sprouted decals, and no one got fined for it. Mrs. Dolores held meetings in her backyard with iced tea and folding chairs, where people spoke up. Lily's college essay, "My Grandpa, the Gravel Rebel," got her into Ohio State, complete with a request for Henry to speak at orientation. He waved it off, saying, "I'd rather fix my hammock." The gravel pile became a quirky landmark, ringed with painted stones and a sign, "Battle of Lot 23. We shoveled. We won." But healing wasn't instant. Some neighbors, loyal to Margaret, grumbled about anarchy. Others struggled to adjust to a world without constant rules. When a kid's bike entered a mailbox, no one snitched. Neighbors fixed it and gave the kid a soda. It was progress, but fragile. Henry, back to yelling at squirrels, seemed lighter, like a weight had lifted. One evening, as fireflies blinked over the street, he sat with Lily on the porch. "None of this happens without you going full gravel warrior," she said. He sipped his tea. "Sometimes you need a bucket of rocks to wake people up." The first anniversary of the gravel drop dawned bright and warm, the kind of Ohio morning where the air smells of cut grass and possibility. Maplewood had changed not with a dramatic overhaul, but in the quiet, stubborn way a river reshapes a bank. The cul-de-sac felt alive again, neighbors waving without checking over their shoulders, lawns sprouting quirky decorations like wildflowers after a long winter. Henry Brooks, now a local legend, sat on his porch swing, its deliberate squeak a badge of honor. "Silence is for suckers," he'd say, grinning. The gravel pile, once a symbol of conflict, was now a monument, encircled by painted rocks and tiny figurines, with a wooden sign proclaiming, "Battle of Lot 23. We came, we shoveled, we conquered." The neighborhood had found its pulse. Mrs. Dolores, still interim HOA president, ran meetings like backyard barbecues, with lemonade and open mics for gripes or ideas. Committees sprang up not just for landscaping, but for block parties, a tool-lending library, even a kids' mural project. It wasn't utopia. Disagreements still flared, like when Carl insisted the new streetlights were government trackers. But arguments were settled with words, not fines. Mailboxes bloomed with personality, some painted with polka dots, others with sports logos. No one got a violation notice for daring to be human. Henry's role in the uprising hadn't faded from memory. Neighbors stopped by to snap photos with the gravel pile, leaving trinkets like bottle caps or plastic flamingos as tributes. Lily, now a freshman at Ohio State, turned the saga into her college essay, "The Gravel Rebel," weaving Henry's defiance into a story of community reborn. It didn't just get her accepted, it earned an invite for Henry to speak at orientation about intergenerational leadership. He snorted, saying, "I'd rather teach squirrels to salute." But you could see the pride in his eyes when Lily showed him the acceptance letter. The legal fallout from Margaret Hensley's reign fizzled fast. Her lawsuit, built on bluster and forged signatures, collapsed when Mr. Peterson's evidence of fraud hit the public. The city's apology for the gravel mix-up was a footnote, blaming a hapless clerk named Todd who'd since moved to Florida. They offered to clear the pile, but Henry waved them off. "It's earned its keep," he said, patting a rock like an old friend. The truth about the gravel that it was a typo, not Margaret's plot, became a running joke. Never underestimate a bad address, Henry would quip. Life settled, but it wasn't the same. Maplewood had learned to breathe. When a kid's soccer ball flattened a neighbor's tulips, the owner just shrugged. They'll grow back. When a dog dug up a flower bed, the apology came with coffee, not a citation. These were small acts, but they wove a new fabric. Henry returned to his routines, polishing his Navy medals, arguing with the TV, tossing peanuts to squirrels he pretended to hate. Yet there was a lightness to him, a peace that went deeper than victory. For a man who'd fought wars and bureaucrats, this fight had given him something rare, a legacy rooted in belonging. Lily's mural project became a symbol of the new Maplewood. She rallied neighbors to paint a gray wall along the neighborhood's west side. Some added sunflowers, others scrawled quotes like "Live free" or "Mulch." Henry, with a twinkle in his eye, painted a tiny tank rolling through daisies, captioned, "Respect your elders, or else." The mural wasn't just art, it was ownership, a reminder that this place was theirs again. Fences still stood, but they felt less like walls and more like invitations to chat over coffee. The block party marking the gravel anniversary was bigger than anyone expected. Tables lined Elm Street, groaning with casseroles, pies, and a questionable Jell-O mold from Carl. Kids zipped around on scooters, their laughter mingling with classic rock from a crackly speaker. Someone dragged out a grill that looked like it hadn't fired up since the Reagan era. As the sun dipped, casting an orange glow over the rooftops, we gathered around the gravel monument. Henry, nudged by Lily, gave a speech short, unrehearsed, perfect. "This pile of rocks was a problem," he said, voice steady. "We turned it into something better. It's proof that no one's too small to stand up, no bone's too old to make waves. Sometimes, you just need to make enough noise to wake the street." He raised a plastic cup of lemonade, and the crowd joined in, glasses clinking, kids cheering. It wasn't a movie ending, all neat and shiny. It was real, messy, human, and earned. Penelope, the pink flamingo that started it all, stood proudly on our lawn, freshly painted with aviator sunglasses and a tiny flag reading, "Viva la Gravel." Cars honked as they passed, and Henry would nod, half saluting. The neighborhood kept evolving. A mailbox-turned lending library popped up on Oak Lane. A teen started a dog-walking co-op. Mrs. Dolores announced a vote for a permanent HOA president, promising to step down once the bylaws were rewritten to prioritize people over power. Maplewood wasn't just surviving, it was living. One evening, as fireflies flickered, Henry and Lily sat on the porch, watching the street settle into dusk. "You know," Lily said, "this all happened because you went rogue with a wheelbarrow." Henry chuckled. "Sometimes a bucket of rocks is all it takes to shake things loose. Regret any of it?" She shook her head. He thought for a moment. "Nah, storms come. You either hide or build a better roof." He paused, smirking. "Plus, I hated that Cadillac." The Gravel Rebellion, as the local paper called it, left a mark beyond Maplewood. Ex-posts still circulated, with Gravelgate inspiring other neighborhoods to challenge their HOAs. Lily's website became a blueprint for transparency, shared by community groups across Ohio. Henry, though, stayed out of the spotlight, content to tinker in his garage or nap in his hammock. He'd done what he set out to do, remind Maplewood it could be a home, not a prison. As the stars emerged that anniversary night, porch lights flicked on, one by one, like beacons of a new era. Maplewood wasn't perfect, but it was free to argue, to create, to be a little weird. The gravel pile, Penelope, Henry's tank mural, they were all part of the story now, proof that even a typo could spark a revolution. And as the music faded and neighbors drifted home, you could feel it. This was our street, won back not with fists, but with courage, community, and a whole lot of rocks. The Gravel Rebellion is more than a tale of rocks and revenge. It's a story about standing up to injustice, even when the odds feel stacked against you. What do you think about Henry's fight? Was his gravel dumping defiance a justified rebellion? Or did it cross a line into chaos? How would you handle a tyrant like Margaret in your community? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Let's spark a conversation about power, resistance, and what it means to fight for what's right. Your voice matters, so weigh in.